Hello, and welcome to this episode of Mindset Mentoring for athletes, families, and entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Coach Chuck. There's one question nearly every parent, every athlete, every entrepreneur asks, and almost nobody answers well. Why is it that I want to do something, I know how to do it, I know what to do, and I still don't do it? Well, today's guest is one of the few in the world who specializes in solving that exact problem: internal resistance. It's a conversation you'll definitely want to stay tuned for.
It doesn't yell, it doesn't bleed, but it's killing us slowly, quietly. Stress, the invisible enemy behind sleepless nights, fractured relationships, fading focus, and dreams left in the dust. It's not just adults. It's our kids, our players, our students. We think it's the stress itself that's the enemy. But the real danger, how we've been conditioned to react to it. What if our normal reaction to stress doesn't have to be normal? What if the most powerful weapon against stress is already inside you?
Hello and welcome back. Our guest today is Kam Knight, a mentor, international speaker, and best-selling author of over a dozen books on mental, emotional, and physical performance, whose work has helped more than 500,000 people worldwide. Kam is known for bringing fresh frameworks, fresh perspective, and real-world solutions that break people free from self-sabotage, unconscious resistance, and invisible blockers. He's traveled to over 100 countries studying human behavior and performance. And today he's here to help us break through what stops people even when they want to succeed. Let's welcome Kam Knight to the show. Welcome.
Hey, thank you, Chuck, for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, it's an honor. And you and I, looking at all your stuff and all, we do the same kind of work. So it's always, I love having conversations with people who are in the field, so to speak. So getting
Yeah,
another perspective will also be very beneficial for the audience. The more voices you hear, the more tools you can acquire. So I always love to have my guests just, you know, introduce themselves, give us a little bit
sure.
about your background and where you came, you're from, you're growing up, that kind of got you to where you're at today, and then we'll delve into the meat of the matter.
All right, perfect. So, as you had mentioned, my name is Kam Knight. I'm a mentor, international speaker, and author of a dozen books, many of the ones you see behind me. And now I do talk about this concept I call internal resistance, which answers a question I had my whole life. And that is, why is it if I want to do something, I know what to do, I know how to do it, and I have the motivation and desire to do it, but for one reason or another, I can't or don't do it? And how I got to this will require like rewinding to when I actually moved to the States. My parents had really high expectations of me, but a low support. So, if we're talking about the quadrant of high expectation, high support, high expectation, low support, low expectation, high support, and low expectation, low support, I was on that quadrant where there was high expectation and very little support. And added to that, I watched a lot of television growing up. And unfortunately, I grew up on television. And the conclusion that my mind made was that my worth and deserving was dependent on external factors such as the house I lived in, the car I drove, the amount in my bank account, as well as a job I had. And so those two combined, I had a lot of motivation and drive to do well. And although I've had my fair share of success, I always felt like I fell short or missed the mark. And I'll give a couple examples. In high school, I worked really hard to want to get into an Ivy League school. And although I got into a decent college, it wasn't quite Ivy League. And I used what's called the backdoor method, where I applied to get into a really easy major. And once I got in, I switched to what I really wanted to do. And then in college, I studied to get into a big five accounting firm. And although I had really good jobs where I did well, I didn't get into that firm. And so, more or less, my life was kind of like that, wanting to do bigger things and falling short in a lot of ways. And it wasn't with just these big successes, it was even smaller things. Say, I wanted to develop a skill or to exercise or to get in shape. I would either start and not start. If I started, I would stop. If I didn't stop, I would sabotage myself before making progress, and so on. And at a certain point, I started asking that question: why is it if I want to do something, no matter how much I want to do it, I can't do it? And unfortunately, at the time, there were no clear answers. The best answers that personal development, at least, was talking about related to beliefs, saying that you need to have better beliefs, or things related to you don't have motivation or discipline. And although they are pieces of the puzzle, I felt like there was more to it. And more or less, I went on a journey to understand human mind and behavior. And at a certain point, my brain had this aha moment where it was like, wait a minute, there's a part of our mind designed to hold us back. There's a part of our brain built to keep us from growing and making progress. And I call this part resistance. And it is this brick wall that we hit anytime that we want to do something, but we can't, no matter how much we want to do it.
Yeah, so one of the things you said in there that I think seems to be like almost a universal experience, and it's the idea of like you set goals, you want to lose weight,
Yeah.
you want to do those things. It's the old, New Year's resolutions, right? How many people make New Year's resolutions and then they might get
Yes.
1 week into it or what have you, and it just all falls apart. Now, within that, you said beliefs are important, but there's something else that you're now calling this internal
Yeah.
resistance.
Yeah.
In your journey, or like, when did you come to the conclusion that there was this other part, kind of
Yeah.
why? And I might be putting words in your mouth, but it sounded like you were saying that it's kind of wired into us.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit more about how you came about with that aha moment and why you believe it was something that humans have wired into them.
Okay, that's great. So I'll first talk about more or less why it's wired into us. And then second, I'll go into how I had the aha moment. So it'll help to understand that the part of the brain that creates wants and desires works separately from the part that allows us to act on the desire. And this is extremely important, so I'll say it one more time. The part of the brain that creates wants works independent of the part that actually allows us to act on the want. So we have one part of the brain that's creating wants, and in many ways, it's creating endless wants, one after another, at a pace that's faster than for any person to achieve. And so this part doesn't check to see if a want is achievable, if it's fulfilling, or if it's even worth doing. It's only designed to create wants, and as such, it just creates all sorts of wants. Then we have another part of the brain that actually checks to see if that want is worth moving forward with. It'll check to see if it's safe, worth doing, and so on. And this is really important to understand because one brain can both create a desire for something and keep us from going after it. And for a long time, I used to think whoever created humanity, whether it was God, aliens, or evolution, must have been really twisted because how could they do this to us? How could they create these burning desires and then keep us from going after them and having us experience the pain of not having it? Well, it makes sense when you come from this perspective. And so, how does resistance work? Anytime there is a desire, resistance checks that desire to see if it's worth doing, using a whole host of criterias. And if the desire is not in line with any of the criterias, it will prevent action. So, what are some of these criterias? Well, one of them has to do with beliefs. If we're trying to do something that we don't think is possible or possible for us, resistance will come up. But then there's these other desires, such as identity. We humans, or our brain, is designed to have us act in line with the identity that we have formed or accepted. So if a person has an identity that they're an athlete, it's going to be much easier to work out, get in shape, because their brain goes, oh, well, I'm an athlete and that's what I do. If a person doesn't have that identity, or they don't have an identity where they can be fit, then their brain is going to be like, well, that's not my identity, and it'll prevent action. And these are just a couple of characteristics. There's more that we could talk about, and some of them go quite deep and don't get a lot of attention. And because they don't get a lot of attention, it holds people back from moving forward because they don't get an opportunity to work through it. So that kind of explains why the brain is almost designed to hold us back. And then I'll go into how I kind of came into this aha moment. And it was actually after a Brendan Burchard seminar I went to, and he had a guest on stage who talked about the concept of identity. And he more or less said one of the reasons that one of the ways to stick with what you want to do is develop an identity of the person or the goal you're trying to achieve. And then I remember going home after that seminar, and then a few days or weeks later, I just had this moment because, as I mentioned, I was studying a lot of human mind and behavior. And based on what I was learning, it was always, oh, this will get in your way. This will stop you. If you don't do this, this will keep you from moving forward. And then when I heard about the identity and it, connected to other things I'd heard, like beliefs, family systems, authority issues, self image, and so on, my brain is like, oh, wow, there's a part of our mind built to hold us back. There's a part of our brain designed to keep us from making progress. And I gave it the name resistance.
You know, glad you brought up identity because that's so powerful. And I had my own aha moment with that. And it's interesting because during my educational background, my early training in NLP, you kind of, you get some of this information, but the thing that just it was a real life experience that just really kind of connected it. And I was working in public education in school and uh, got to meet, I call him Jimmy, who was always in trouble. Was getting kicked out of class all the time, and I would I had to fill in for one of his teachers, and I didn't have Jimmy like in my program or anything, but I knew of him, and I kind of knew that all right, I'm filling in for his teacher. I'm going to see some of these behaviors, and sure enough, did. First 5 minutes, the education technician who was assigned to him one on one was removing him from class, and I went out the hall with him and said, Jimmy, like, why are you such a pain in the butt to everybody? He's like, that's because what I am. The light bulbs went off. It's
Mm.
like, ah, how did you decide that? He's like, confused. I didn't decide that. Oh, so you chose to believe a lie. So I was trying to interrupt the patterns, right, with what I'm talking
Yeah,
about, but he was behaving to keep his identity of being a pain in the butt.
yeah,
It was just kind of one of those aha moments. So, a lot of the work I do, that is part of it. It's trying to help people, what are those labels that they've attached and how strong are those labels? Are those labels that are really part of who they truly believe they are? Because when they are, it's a
yeah.
significant impact. So there's beliefs and the labels and decisions and emotions and all those things. What were because you just kind of said that there are some other kind of deeper
Yeah.
levels. You want to talk about some of those things too?
Yeah, I think this might given the example that you gave, I think it would be really helpful to understand the concept of authority issues. So, authority issues relate to our unconsciously held attitudes toward authority figures such as parents, principals, priests, police officers, and even personal development coaches and mentors like ourselves. So, I'm going to extend that definition to anyone who tells you or makes you feel obligated to do something. And to understand authority issues, I'm going to share a quick story. I had a friend whose parents always nagged and pestered him about cleaning his room. They nagged and pestered him so much that he became spiteful towards them and unknowingly carried that spite for decades. So, as an adult, he lived a messy life simply out of spite. He didn't know why until he saw a therapist that his messy lifestyle was triggered by his parents from 20 years ago. The resistance was unconscious. He didn't know why he couldn't stay clean or organized no matter how hard he tried. So, if we are growing up around people who are always telling us what to do, what not to do, how to do it, and how not to do it, at a certain point, the brain gets fed up and doesn't want to listen or do anything it's told. And so, even when we do grow up and we can make our own decisions and we want to do some of the things that we're told, for example, studying or eating better or not consuming so much media, we can't because authority issue response kicks in and prevents us from doing it. And oftentimes it happens just to spite or not give the authorities in our lives the satisfaction of telling us what to do. So, in this case, with this example you gave, I don't know what his past was like or what his home life was like, but maybe he was constantly being told what to do and he didn't get the love, attention, affection that he was desiring. And so his brain is like, well, if I don't get this and I'm not getting any positive benefits from listening to anyone, I'm not going to listen to anybody. And then it created this response where he was just a pain in the butt and almost to the point of doing the exact opposite of what he was being asked to do. And then the other reason could be because he got so much attention from being a pain and not attention from other ways, his brain is like, well, this is how I get attention, so I'll continue doing this. And again, a lot of our resistance are unconscious. We don't choose it, we just find ourselves playing it out. And the same thing with authority issues. And what's really interesting about authority issues is that oftentimes we are doing it to hurt or outsmart the people who told us what to do, or we're doing essentially for those two reasons, but it only hurts ourselves. So when we don't listen to the teacher, it doesn't affect the teacher's grades, it affects ours. When we don't listen to the parent, it doesn't affect their health, it affects ours. And although we might be trying to outsmart our teachers and parents, we end up looking like the fool because we're not making the progress and we actually make life more difficult and hard on ourselves.
It's the human mind is
I
so
know.
fast. It's just so fascinating.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if you've seen it. It's on YouTube, but Tony Robbins and I first got certified in NLP with Tony Robbins, but he has
Oh,
uh,
nice.
there's a video where he does a cure of somebody who had a 30-year stuttering problem, and basically when that person he was working with was a young boy, his parents were fighting, and my understanding was his dad was abusive towards his mom, and he was taking all that in, and he was watching Rocky and Bullwinkle, right, the old cartoon, and the the moose in that stutters, and he made some sort of connection or something unconsciously, right, watching Rocky and Bullwinkle, and he did some behavior at that moment that interrupted his dad's pattern, and it kind of got locked into this stuttering habit. Who was the cartoon he was walking? He had no idea, right? He had no idea. So for 30 years, he's stuttering based on that incident that got reinforced back when he was he was a boy.
Yeah.
And once Tony was able to discover that, he went through some processes to kind of break free of that. Um,
Yeah. It is
it-
actually quite wild, and I want to share a really quick story
sure,
from my life that is similar. As I mentioned, growing up, my parents weren't really around, and because I was new to the US and it was a complete culture shock from the part of the world that I come from, I really didn't know what was going on. And how I was trying to understand humans and human behavior initially was through television. And, I watched certain shows like Married with Children, and I don't know if you watch that show, but it revolves around the guy who works as a shoe salesman. He lives pretty poor, and he's around some semi-dysfunctional family where things never go right. And so even though every show is about, the potential of something good happening, it always ends where he's back to where he started. And if you notice, a lot of other shows are kind of like that too. Tom and Jerry, where the cat is almost about to beat the mouse, but ends up, you know, right back to where all of his um, storylines end, where the mouse actually beats him. And so that pattern was locked in my brain, where the more I was trying to do something and be successful, I'd get to a certain level, and then somehow unconsciously I sabotaged myself. So I came right back to where I started. And I didn't realize how much television and media influenced this pattern. Is because I saw it so much, and my brain came to the conclusion that that's the way life is, or success is difficult and it's not really attainable. I can work hard, but I'll always fall back to that same place. And I have developed a method that helps people go into their unconscious and go quite deep and to see the different connections in their past that their mind made to create the results they are. That's how I saw it. And so, without it, it would have been really hard to even come through it. So, to circle back to what you're saying, yes, the mind is fascinatingly complex. And if you are NLP certified, you, I think, understand that as well, because there's so much going on internally that is driving our behaviors that we don't have much conscious awareness of. And this is a good time to bring up that there isn't a direct line of communication between the conscious and unconscious mind. Much of our unconscious is hidden from us, which is why it is called the unconscious. So we don't see all the stuff going on in our unconscious that's driving our thinking, our thoughts, as well as our decisions and actions. We think we're the ones thinking what we're thinking or taking the actions we are, but it's really driven by what's going on internally. And so that adds to the challenge of understanding why we're doing what we're doing, but more importantly, why we can't do what it is that we want to do.
lately. And it sounds like you and I have a similar belief in that. I talk a lot, use different metaphors, but it's one thing, and one of the issues I've had with some of the self-help stuff out there is, positive affirmations and do all positive thinking, which is great. Like it's important stuff, it's good stuff. But if you haven't cleared out the weeds of your life, if you haven't kind
Yes.
of excavated those stuff, it's like building a house on a bad foundation. It's just
Yeah.
you're not going to get the same results. So, it's so important to help people identify what's back there. It sounds like that's exactly
Yeah.
one of the things that you do, and then to show them how they can let go of that and clear it out.
Yeah.
Because again, like, and I don't want to say it doesn't work. Like, I know people, you read all these positive affirmations, think positive, you listen to all this upbeat music, all those kinds of things that can be really helpful can work.
Yeah.
It can. It's so much less efficient and less likely to have long-term benefits if you don't clear out the stuff beforehand. So it, it sounds like that's what you agree with, and you have, without giving away your trade secret. It sounds like you have come up with your own kind of process for doing that. Is that
Yeah.
accurate?
Yes, 100%. So I recently did NLP training and it works a little just to see what is out there. But I had developed something on my own that I've been working on for the last 20 years and with other clients for the last couple of years. And yeah, it's about getting into the unconscious level. And I want to say that 100% I agree with you. There is a lot of positivity and positive thinking. And I think those are all good because it helps us take forward action and things that don't pull us back. But there is a challenge to positivity because working with a lot of clients, I've come to realize a lot of the positivity suppresses the negative. And so positivity is good for the things I mentioned, but we still also want to access and work through the resistance because at a certain point, if the resistance isn't addressed, it does start silently working in the background to make progress much more difficult than it needs to be, or actually starts to hold us back, or it starts to sabotage ourselves when we do make that progress. And we are in a time where there's a lot of motivational and inspirational content. And I think that could be good because we have a lot of experiences that really, affect our emotions. And it's nice to get that jolt of motivation or uplifting message that can help us move past those things. But I'm finding that most people are veering overly to the motivational and inspirational side and not really working through or and accessing what's going on internally. And I believe it's because, when we hear a motivational quote or something inspirational or uplifting, it floods the mind, triggers these really positive sensations that make us feel really good. And those sensations can make us feel like we've worked through the problem or it has cleared the issue. That's how good those feelings are. And then when we feel good, we click the like or we comment on the post that gave us that jolt of feeling. And so the algorithm, it reinforces the algorithm to have more motivational and uplifting content. And so then more people are creating motivational and uplifting content and becomes this runaway process or cycle where now we're just an industry of just so much motivational and uplifting content because it gives people this cookie, and because it gives them the cookie, it triggers that algorithm that that's what they want more, and they're not seeing that there's another side to the coin, which is more or less what we're talking about, resistance or the inner work where things are going on internally that's not only holding us back, but creating these negative experiences where we need the uplifting feeling. So, yeah, 100% I agree with where you're coming from.
You mentioned earlier, and then you just kind of brought it up again with the impact media has. And, having worked for so many years with teenagers and seeing the changes over time, and always knowing that media, just back in the days of music videos, TV shows,
Yeah,
right, to now with social media and and well, we're getting into AI now, and like, geez, how do you know whether anything's true or real? But that constant comparison, the constant bombardment of manufactured reality, and I use those terms a little bit hesitantly, but there's so much of what people are putting out there, content-wise, especially younger people, that is it's it's doctored, right? They're making everything try to look just right, and I don't think it's just adding these layers to teenagers' difficulties, uh, and and I even think when they start doing it at a younger age, they're beginning to wire their brains with some things beyond the unconscious that are going to add to the resistance instead of
yeah,
add to the other. What are your thoughts on that influence of
Oh, there's a
media,
lot of
social
thoughts
media?
I have. So
Yeah.
I did allude to media earlier, and when I talked about it, I said sadly or unfortunately, in many ways, I grew up on media. And the reason I use that word is because it did have, I would say, not the most positive effect. And there's many challenges to media. The first is what sounds good in story doesn't necessarily work in real life. And so when we watch these Disney movies where the prince gets the princess or these other shows, they create these really positive, feel good feelings. And unless a person is aware, it's not the expectation or that's not how the real world works. And I have noticed that a lot of people are chasing what they've seen on media and they're getting disappointed because that's not what the outcome they're getting. So, in many ways, I've noticed many women are seeking for that prince in shining armor, or many men are seeking a lot of the stereotypes that are projected or presented of relationships as well as women. And when they come to work with me and we're doing the inner work, it's like, oh wow, you're upset because this is the expectation you had and you're not getting it, or it's been really difficult for you to get it. And so you're upset that you're not getting it. When reality, it's not even possible to get that thing. So you're getting upset about something that isn't in line with reality, one. And then another challenge with media, especially social media now, is it's all about getting people's attention. And the way people are doing that is trying to make outlandish claims or saying things that go against the grain or some of the fundamental principles of how the mind and body work. So they can get people to get their attention and draw them into what they're saying or what they're selling. And if a person is not aware, they can easily think some of these headlines or what's the word that's kind of used in media sound bites are actually true when they're not. And if we start living as those are true and not getting the results that we were promised, then again, it kind of affects how we view ourselves and that we're not getting that thing and things of that nature. One of the most important things about media to understand that doesn't get talked about is now scenes are changing much quicker than ever before. So if a person watches a movie from the 50s or 60s, they'll notice that the camera is on a particular scene for about 3 seconds or longer 3 seconds, 4, 5, 6 seconds. Nowadays, it's gotten to a point where it's under a second. So the scene changes, and then there's a lot more activity on the screen where there's tickers and banners and sound effects, as well as other pattern interrupts. And that is training the brain to hold attention for shorter and shorter periods. And not only that, but to need all sorts of stimulation to be able to hold attention. And when that is not there, people literally tune out or they can't focus. And so there are a lot of challenges media does present. One is expectations, where people are doing what, in a way, I did, looked at media to understand how the world works, or they're learning about what they can expect or receive or how things should be, especially in relationships, because of what they saw on media. And then two, there just to get our attention, a lot of stuff is being said that in many ways is either bending the truth or going against the grain, and that can really affect how a person's beliefs, I guess, even identity there. And then most importantly is not so much the content, but how that content is presented. With so much stimulation, our brain is getting conditioned to need that stimulation on a regular basis. And so we're constantly going back to media for that stimulation, which is where some of the addiction arises. Or we're doing other things to get that stimulation, whether that might be leading us into um, taking more stimulants than we need, coffee. A lot of people have ADD now, and what is being prescribed to deal with that is a stimulant. And I do believe it's kind of stemming all from media.
That's a very interesting take when you said that about the 50s movies and all. I began thinking about some of the classic movies that I love from,
Yeah,
30s, 40s, 50s, what have you.
I'm a big
And
fan too. I just want to say,
say that again.
I wanted to say I'm a big fan of the classics as well.
Yeah, but I like when I think of some of the, like the action movies of today. It's like, yeah, absolutely. Like there's just so
Yeah,
much going on. In fact, I still remember one first time I ever sat down and watched Jason Bourne movie. Right, the very first one.
yeah,
I, I was having a hard time at first because it was just too much action. My brain couldn't deal with
so
it.
fast paced. Yeah,
Yeah, it was. So my, it's making me think about all that and the rise in ADD and all that. I remember a book I've read recently, and I've mentioned this in other interviews, but it was The Comfort of Crisis or the Crisis Comfort, something along those effects. But the idea here is that we are, particularly in the West, United States, very things are just very comfortable. And for
yeah,
personal growth, for um, yeah, life is going to try to make you uncomfortable by design,
yeah,
like because that's how we grow. And one little piece in that, he talked about young people in particular, but we can't handle boredom. Like like we just and I started watching people, and you've probably seen it, right? Like if they're in the waiting room of a doctor's office or waiting for a
yeah,
flight, all right? I was just flew recently, and so they they can't they can't just sit there, right? The phones are out and they're scrolling. I've experienced that myself. Like, oh,
yeah,
I'm putting this thing away. Trying to be alone with just your thoughts is incredibly hard, especially for the younger generation. And for me, that's not a good thing. That's a bad thing. Um, so I want to kind of get to again when you are then working with people and you're trying to uncover these things and you go through your processes, right? You're trying to interrupt some patterns, I'm assuming.
yeah,
And then how do you try to help them kind of go forward from there? How much does trying to help them build habits, rituals, routines in their life to do that play into the work you do?
yeah. So this is a really good question, and the answer is a little long-winded, and I'll try to answer as best as possible. But before jumping into that, I do want to talk about the boredom piece. It is extremely important because I read an article that said a lot of the reasons social media became so big is because they termed it as a boredom killer. And it really is difficult for us to just sit there and not do anything. And I don't think it's that way because of the time we live in. I think it's always been that way, which is why prior to media, whether social media or television, we had other ways to kill boredom where we had the newspaper. So if a person was on a morning commute, they would read the newspaper on the morning commute, or even in the bathroom, there would always be a newspaper or magazine to help that person with the boredom. And prior to that, there were these games, and now all the games are video games on our phones. But back then, it used to be like chess and checkers and backgammon that we played on a board and that we carried with us. And they had travel and pocket sized versions. And so they are all boredom killers. And it does come down to the fact that by nature, fundamental nature, and again, not because we're living in this time, because it's just the way we are, the human mind and body always likes to be engaged and active, which is why even a short flight can be so annoying when we're just sitting there not doing anything. And I do believe it's also the reason why some people might drink to take the edge off or smoke weed just to be able to chill and relax. in many ways, we're doing some of these things just so we can enjoy not doing something. So that is one big aspect of the human condition. Now, how I tell people about how we can benefit from this feature is that if we need to be active and do stuff anyways, why not do the things that is going to get us what we want or move in the direction that's going to be more positive and constructive? So a lot of times we don't do certain things because we think of the task and it's like, well, I don't want to put in all this time, energy, and effort into that. Well, if you don't, you're going to have to put time, energy, and effort into something else just to keep your mind and body occupied. And usually that ends up being distractions, such as the things that we've mentioned. And once I came to this realization, I actually came to this realization when I was traveling. I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. So if I'm going to need to be active, why not just be active with the more positive and constructive things? And that's what I have chosen to do. I've literally cut out any sort of distractions that it's going to make me active in things that aren't going to be helpful and only allowed activity into my home or into my space or environment that moves me forward in the direction that I want. So hopefully this could be a really helpful shift for a lot of people who feel who kind of start to get lazy when it's time to do something, is for them to understand they're going to need to do something anyways. So why not just do the thing that they're avoiding? And then to go into how I help people, one of the most important things to understand is that the human brain is extremely complex and fascinatingly complex, meaning there isn't any cookie cutter solution to overcoming resistance. We actually have to look at the resistance and figure out what's causing the resistance and do things that help overcome that cause. A lot of times people will come across a tip or advice and they see that it works for one person, but it won't work for someone else, or it doesn't work for them, and they think that, well, they're not good enough or they don't have what it takes. Well, the reason it worked for the other person is because it addressed the resistance they had. And their resistance might be different, or they may have multiple layers of resistance. And so I want people to kind of understand that, where if something doesn't work, it may not be because there's something wrong with them. It's just that we're looking at um, more. They may need to look at some. They may have some other resistance that tip or technique doesn't address. And then one other thing that also helps with resistance is actually starting with the wants. It may not, it may seem kind of counterintuitive, but our own wants can be a challenge in achieving that want. And that's because, as I alluded to earlier, our wanting mechanism is, in a lot of ways, unrestrained. So it's cranking out wants and desires at a pace that's faster than any one person can achieve. In fact, even if we lived multiple lives, we couldn't achieve, let alone enjoy, the wants our brain is producing in just 1 month. And so this is creating what I call, not what I call, but what's called the shiny object syndrome, where our brain wants this one thing, and before we can start or work on it, it creates a want for something else. And before we can start or move forward on that, it creates a want for something else. And this constant stimulation from our wanting mechanism is pulling us in all directions, and it's difficult to move or focus on any one. Though this is just one challenge of our wants. In my work, I have found there's about a good dozen other challenges our own wants create. So it really helps to start with the want. And then when we narrow in on a specific want to work on, then we look at the resistance that's coming up. And then from the resistance, what's really important to understand is that when the brain holds us back, it doesn't tell us that it's holding us back or give us a reason. So if beliefs, identity, or authority issues are the issue, our brain isn't going to say, hey, Chuck, you know, that thing that you're trying to do, well, it goes against our authority issues, and we don't want to give satisfaction to the people in our lives. So we're just going to sit here and not do anything. Nope, that's not what happens. Our resistance shows up other ways, and they show up as tricks. And our brain has all sorts of tricks up its sleeve to keep us from doing what it doesn't want us to do. And some of the more obvious tricks include distractions that we have mentioned, like social media, television, video games, and even drinking and alcohol. And I say obvious because when we're doing those things, a part of us knows we should be doing something different. We kind of know we're procrastinating or not doing something bigger that we had on our plate. But there are not so obvious tricks that are very deceptive. And some of them include overly planning. And I see this a lot of people have a goal, and before starting on the goal, they'll plan to figure out what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, and so on. And they spend so much time planning, they don't take action. Because they don't take action, resistance wins in keeping them from moving forward. Another common thing that a lot of people or a lot of people listening here will resonate with is perfectionism. A lot of times before starting something or putting their work out there, they'll go into this state of overly perfecting things, making sure all their I's are dotted and T's are crossed. And all the time they spend on perfecting, it's time they're not spending on the goal or putting themselves out there. And again, resistance wins again. And there are dozens and dozens of tricks that our brain uses to keep us from moving forward. So a lot of times it does show up as procrastination and laziness, but it shows up even when we're not procrastinating or being lazy in what I'm kind of talking about. In fact, I will go as far as to say if a person is doing something that's not moving the needle forward in their life, it's a trick. And that's a good way to understand if they're in procrastinating or self sabotaging behavior. And then finally, and just to summarize, we start with the wants, then we look at the resistance, then we look at the tricks of resistance, and then finally we focus on forward moving action. And that also kind of depends on what's going on for the person. And this is where a lot of the traditional self help and personal development come into play. So there's a lot of personal development techniques such as goal setting, breaking goals into manageable tasks, using things like what's it called, habit stacking, or there's another word where you commit to something small, and once you get started, you can do something bigger. That's where those things kind of come in. And I know a lot of times people start with that and they may make progress, more progress than they did without it, but somehow they still fall short or sabotage themselves is because we need to work on these other layers first. I hope that made sense.
No, completely. And there, there's several things in there. So again, this kind of circles back to some of the things we talked about earlier, right? When if you aren't taking care of the stuff, the unconscious level, and you do all that self-development stuff, it's not going to have the same sort of impact. But you said something in there about perfectionism. It just made me think about a student that I had had who was a very good writer. I mean, naturally writer, right? She just had a way with
Yeah.
words, but she she didn't even get started because in her own mind it was never perfect. So why even get
Yes.
started? Because she knew she wasn't going to get it to be perfect. And
Yeah.
until we began to break those all those beliefs and the thinking, all that stuff had to be broken down in order for her to really write. But she wasn't unmotivated. She not in the way we think. It was all about
Yeah.
these patterns, these beliefs, these thinking, these and I never really is sure. I was never really sure exactly where that began for her. It was sometime in elementary school or what the trigger was. Um, but it was playing out. She had
Yeah.
this image in mind of perfection, knew she could, in her own mind, she knew she couldn't reach it, so why bother, right? And
Exactly.
yeah, it's fascinating how that all comes. But you know, I talk a lot about with people. All right, we got to interrupt patterns, clear things out, and then I want to build. This goes back to something else you said too. I want to help you build rituals in your life that you can use those rituals, and I got principles in those, but everybody's different, so you don't need to do. Everybody's rituals should be different, but um, the more flexible you can be in your own behavior, the greater the results you're going to have. And you're going to need that as you move forward in life because you can't plan for everything that pops up. And what pops up will have a different need for response. But
Yeah,
in the principles we talk about in the morning is to prepare your mind, body, and spirit for the day ahead. And in the evening is to prepare your mind, body, spirit for rest, recovery, and growth.
yeah,
And there are there are components that should be in there. There should be something related to the body. There should be a component related to the mind. There should be a component related to the spirit. What that looks like or means for an individual can be different, but it's so important to build those in. But doing that, going back to your resistance, is if you haven't tackled the resistance, trying to build those rituals, like it's
yeah,
not going to happen. Uh,
yeah.
you want to
I'm
comment
really
on
glad that
on any
you,
of that? What?
yeah, I just want to harp on the fact that you brought up the perfectionism. I know so many talented artists, musicians, and creatives, like almost gifted people that you'll never hear or learn about because their resistance is perfection. Like they never think is good enough. And they put in so much time and effort in trying to perfect things and not any time in putting it out there. In fact, a lot of times they won't even put it out there. And if I were to kind of dissect what's going on internally, is for that person, it's usually that it comes down to people. So as I mentioned, there's various criteria that the brain evaluates before it decides to let you do something. And we talked about a few of them. We talked about beliefs, we talked about authority issues, we talked about identity. But then people plays a role into it as well. And by people, I mean we humans are pack animals. We evolved to live and survive in a pack. As a result, our brain became very sensitive to the thoughts, judgments, actions, and reactions of others. And if our brain believes that we won't be perceived well or our work won't be perceived well, it will create resistance. So I suspect for this person, what was going on was there was a desire and the resistance filtered through all the criteria and it came up with, oh, we may not be perceived well or our work may not be perceived well. And so it it put her in a heightened sense of perfection, meaning it has to be perfect. So no one can not like it. And so we don't have to feel the pain of rejection by someone not liking it. And in many ways, it's very unfortunate. And what I want to tell people who are caught in this, because I know a lot of people are, I was caught in this before I got into writing as many books as I did. Now I can write a book very quickly, but when I first started, it took me over 2 years to write a book. And I would literally spend an hour writing each paragraph. And oftentimes, I wouldn't even end up using that paragraph because I needed to be so perfect. And what was driving is, for me, in a lot of ways, was I needed people to know it was great. And not just one or two people, but everybody. And what I wanted to share about how to get over this is to understand we're living in a time where there's just so many people with so many backgrounds and so many interests. No matter how talented and gifted you are, you can never create something that everyone will like. It's just impossible. And trying to do that will, one, make you go crazy, and two, will keep you from finishing that thing. What a person really needs to do is more learn to take negative feedback and criticism and not make it about themselves and find people who like their work versus focusing on the people who don't. And again, not easy, just inherently with the way the brain is working and built. And yeah, I wanted to really share that because I think this is a really important point as I see it holding a lot of people back.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Thank you for sharing that. We are coming near the end of our time. There's more things I want to kind of bring up, but
Yeah,
there's, anyways. Is there any final thoughts, a piece of advice, something that you would like to share with the audience? And I know I'll be putting in the description of the show and stuff how to get in touch with you. I know you have uh, kamknight.com, I think, is at least one of your
yeah,
websites. Uh,
yeah.
but any final words of wisdom or advice you would love to share with people?
Yeah, so I usually like to end off these interviews by saying or helping people understand that desire does not lead to action. Just because we want to do something doesn't mean we'll take the necessary steps to do it. And our wanting mechanism, and when our want to get triggered and we get this rush of these positive feelings, it can make it seem like we will take the necessary steps. And you hear people saying, oh, yeah, I'm going to do this. This time it's going to work, and things of that nature. But that desire is going to filter through resistance. And it's really the ultimate decider of whether we are going to take action on it or how much action, and more importantly, how hard that action is going to be. And if a person can understand that anytime they are motivated or inspired to do something, they will be much more prepared to move forward and take proactive action. Because the people who just assume that wants are enough to get to the finish line are usually the ones that rarely make it, if at all. But the people who can understand that their own mind will throw roadblocks and hurdles, they can be more prepared to know that they're going to come up and weave through them as they do come up. And so I want to end with by saying that there are challenges and struggles with doing what we want and moving forward in our life and having the success we desire is not with the external world. Our brain does an amazing job, or I should say, resistance, which is how it keeps us from holding back. One of the tricks does an amazing job to convince us it's about the external. And because we think it's about the external, we fall into this thinking of there's nothing I can do. When in reality, majority of our challenges are internal, which is why I call it internal resistance. And this is what makes, us humans complex and challenging is because it really helps to understand the difference between the voice of your desires and the voice of your resistance. They're both your voices, but one is holding you back even though it's giving you the illusion that it's pushing you forward.
Thank you. It's so true. And, after looking at the stuff you shared with me and all, I knew we had a lot of similar beliefs and
Yeah,
ideas and stuff. And it's really good kind of getting somebody else's perspective.
yeah,
So I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to sharing
yeah,
your wisdom with my audience. So thank you.
yeah. No problem. To talk about the free gifts. So I'll do that now. For anyone who's made it this far into listening to us, I've got 3 free gifts for everyone. The first is called Prompt Engineering for Your Mind. The human brain was the original ChatGPT, and you can prompt it to not only give you answers and solutions, but to act on those answers and solutions. The second gift is to build skills and habits in your sleep. And it's possible when you work with the unconscious to get yourself to take action more naturally and easily. And the second guide will show you how to do that. And the third guide is a deeper dive into our discussion on internal resistance. In there, you'll learn some of the other challenges our wants create, some of the other reasons for resistance, and even more tricks than we discussed here. And they can get all 3 of those guides on my website at kamknight.com.
Fantastic. Kamknight.com, and that will also be in the description to the show. So people, I am one of those who always takes advantage of those things because you can never get too much insight, wisdom, or anything else. So appreciate you offering that, and again, thank you for taking the time out to be with us.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me. This was fantastic.
You know, again, this is why I am doing what I'm doing is all the things that Cam talked about. We experience it. Like everybody has those moments where they know there's things they want to do, they know they can do, but they don't. There's lots of these kind of get in your own way, self sabotage, all these little words you talk about, and there's a it's a lifelong journey in getting good at solving those. But when we don't have the understanding of how our mind works and the tools, and sometimes the help clearing some things out, then it becomes totally ineffectual. And this is why I'm so excited about finally bringing forth a mentorship for people. And it's a limited number of people that I can serve, but I'm really excited to offer that. It's going to reach a little wider audience than I ever could when I worked, individually with families and stuff in the school systems I worked in. So it's going to be an application driven. The Champions Mindset Mentorship is where you can find the information on that and apply. It's a championsmindsetmentorship.com. And I really have put a lot over the last couple of years in getting this all prepared and ready, and very excited to offer it to the right people, right, for the right match. So if you have any inkling that maybe this is something that'd be good for your teenager and yourselves as a family, I really encourage you to look at that. And that, once again, is the Champions Mindset Mentorship.com. And until the next episode, I encourage you to go out there and live life to the fullest.